Last week's Mercedes OM 642 teardown was the nastiest and dirtiest engine teardown I've ever done on video. The shop has still not recovered. It's still not the same. However, my hand is doing much better, so that's good. Today we're going to take apart the polar opposite. This is a 2019 Honda Civic 1.5 liter L15BA. It's a 4-cylinder turbocharged direct injected engine. It makes about 180 horsepower. With a manual it makes like 180 foot-pounds of torque. And with a sponge transmission, it makes 162. I didn't really get a good story from this, but it did come from a local dealer, so I do have some details. I heard oiling problem, and basically this car was towed into the dealer, and they said, hey, replace the engine. There was no diagnosis, and I can tell you half of this engine has been apart and parts loosely reinstalled, so we'll find out what happened there. But I'm interested to take this apart. This is the very first one of these I've ever had the chance to take apart, and I'm really hoping this is a large part of my business in the coming years. I did a lot of D-Series engines for a long time. D and B-Series were a staple part of my business, but I'm hoping that this takes their place because D-Series and B-Series are incredibly hard to find with good miles and in good shape. So hopefully this is the new one. I know K-Series, those have always been strong. But anyway, we're going to take this thing apart all the way down and figure out what went wrong. I'd like to take a moment and talk about the name of these engines, and actually almost all of the engines in the Honda lineup from this era, they all have this Earth Dreams designation. And when I first saw this, I had to bite my tongue a little bit. Nothing against Hondas or how good or bad these engines might be, but Earth Dreams, that's the name you come up with? Like other makes have things like Atlas and PowerTech and Vortec and Magnum and like cool sounding names. But Earth Dreams, is that because its performance is so inspiring that the Earth goes to sleep? Anyway, let's get to tearing down. First things first, you guys know the drill. We're going to pull the plugs and see what they look like. The plugs all look good. They all look the same. It looks like factory set gap, not engine set gap. So I don't expect to find too many problems in the combustion chamber. Next, we're going to take the couple of 12s out that hold the intake manifold on. Half of these bolts are missing. These are all loose. And yes, I'm saving these fasteners. They're like brand new. Well, all the intake ports look pretty decent. They're not too carboned up. But again, this is only a couple-year-old motor. Next, we're going to peel the valve cover off and see if we can see any damage. Well, the intake cam is pretty rusty. This must have had some of that high-quality H2O in it. Also, no timing chain. Someone took that off, but I can tell you there's only a couple bolts holding the timing cover. And the nice thing is the design of this head lets me pull it without pulling the cams out. However, I am going to pull the cams out. I'd like to look at the cam journals. And I do notice there is a little crack on this fuel pump housing rear cam cover part. And it's an outward crack, so something made contact with it. And we'll have to figure out what that is. Yeah, let's go ahead and get that off. And then we'll pull the cams out of it. All right, just get this fuel pump off. Looks like a couple 6mm hex bolts that are pretty tight, really tight, way too tight. They definitely didn't want that coming off. Apparently this one wanted to rock on me on its own. Came right out, and that's not a good sign. Some of that silver oil on there. That's not a good sign at all. Next, let's pull this rear cam cover off. Something is under tension. It's not supposed to be that way. All right, well, that was dumb. So there's a couple marks on the top of this, and it's actually cracked right here because someone reinstalled this cover with the cam caps loose. That was dumb. That was really dumb. Next, we're going to pull the intake cam off. It's going to be really easy since half the bolts look like they've been out and there's no timing chain. Oh dear God. Well, that's not right. Well, folks, turns out that might be one piece. Turns out you need oil to keep an engine lubricated. Who knew? These are really fighting me. There we go. Man, these are torn up bad. Come on. Let go. You know you wanna. All right, let's get this cam out. Whew, this thing is toasted. While we're here, let's go ahead and get the exhaust cam out. Let's get these journals cleaned up so you can see the damage. That's gnarly. So this is the worst cam journal, and it is pretty rough. There's a lot of load here. Remember that high pressure fuel pump, which is cam driven, it sits right here, and that's likely one of the reasons, but besides the fact that it's furthest away from the chain, why this is torn up the most, and it gets less torn up as you get towards the timing chain. And the other cam, the exhaust cam, it wasn't nearly as bad, but again, this is where most of the load is, so this is where you're going to find the damage first. Here's the cam. These journals are, that one's really rough. These are going to be in the scrap bin. Definitely not worth trying to save. The other cam, not so bad. And the journals on the cam caps, ooh, they tell the same story. There's the exhaust, and that is the intake, which is the one that had the most damage. All right, let's pull this timing cover off. I don't know if it's going to show us anything, because we know there's no chain. There's also only a couple bolts holding this in. I think that's it. Sadly, there's not a lot to see here without a timing chain and guides and rails and all that stuff. Someone stripped this, likely to transfer to whatever engine they put in. So we're going to go ahead and get some other stuff off so we can get the cylinder head off. Let's get this water manifold off the head, and that will disconnect it from the water pipe that goes to the water pump that's on the block. That might be it. Okay, let go. Don't pee on me. I know you want it. Haha. Before I pull the head, let's talk about some design with this engine. Here are the injectors. And it looks like the rail is gone. They took the rail and the lines. But here are the direct injectors that go right into the combustion chamber. And I know this exhaust manifold flange might look weird, but Honda started doing this in the mid-2000s on their V6s and even some of the 4-cylinders shortly thereafter, where there's no real manifold. There's just a 4-bolt flange. The manifold is cast into the cylinder head. I think part of the reason for doing this is it keeps the exhaust gas temperature higher, which warms up the converter faster. The other reason they do this is it is much cheaper to manufacture. In the last video, I talked about how I lost my air compressor. I actually lost a leg of 3-phase, likely from some rodent climbing on there and popping the fuse. So I didn't have air the last time I did an engine teardown, but this time, we're good. Well, none of those were tight. All right. See if we can get this off. The cylinder head looks pretty good. I don't see any signs of damage whatsoever. So that's good. Well, someone's messing with me here. It's a piece of plastic. Why would there be a piece of plastic there on a cylinder head? Don't cut me this time. It's like a piece of tape. Why was that there? These are questions we will never have an answer to. Originally, this engine had no crank bolt, but this engine shares the same thread and pitch for the crank bolt as a K-Series, and I had one of those laying around, so I am able to turn this over, which turns over pretty smoothly. All the cylinder walls look really nice. I don't really see any damage, but man, those pistons are itty-bitty. I think we ought to have a comparison at the end of this video between this and another engine. What do you think? Okay, let's get this engine flipped upside down and pull the pan. There has never been an engine that has flipped upside down and not puked some massive quantity of fluid, but this actually didn't have much in it. That was actually quite nice. Nice to see a Honda factory oil filter. Let's get that off there. See what we can see. Haha. That almost looks like a brand new filter. Like nothing's been run through it. Time to get a bunch of 10s out and get this pan off. That is still very much on there. Honda leaves you a place to pry, which is nice. Doesn't help if I don't have this pinned though. Well, there's some debris in there. Nothing's totally let go though. Let's go ahead and get this pickup off. I don't see anything weird in there. See, the screen is kind of in the middle here. This turns over really easy. There's a couple tight spots though. Yeah. Man, it's nice to work on little stuff. Let's get this oil pump off. Let's do that next. I think this should slide off. It is not. I just want to get this key out, this Woodruff key, and then I think everything will slide off. Well, we may have to pull the crank with the oil pump. Let's get the oil pump bolts loose, see what we can find. It appears to be all she wrote. Yep. Well, we're going to just have to lift the crank with the oil pump. Well, this is a first for me. This is the first engine I've ever torn down that required a 12.8 millimeter. And I have just about torn the shop upside down trying to find anything that would work. And I got lucky. I found a 12.5/16. We've all done that. And it's going to work. So let's go ahead and get these rod caps off, get the rods and pistons out, and then we'll pull the crank out. None of this stuff is particularly tight. Let go of my hammer. The bearings are surprisingly nice. 2 and 4 show a little bit of wear. You can see a little bit of copper showing through on the edge of that bearing and that upper bearing as well. But I'm pretty surprised that these are in as good a shape as they are. And the rods and pistons are all in really good shape, albeit they're quite small compared to what I'm used to working with. Let's go ahead and get this rear main seal plate out of the way so that we can take the main cap bolts loose, and then we can pull the crank out of it. Don't worry, I've got all the bolts out of this, I swear. All right, let's get this crank out of here. All of the main bearings look pretty good, but as you get closer to the oil pump, you can see there's a little bit of wear right here. I think this engine was run for a very short period of time without oil in it, and it took out the head first. The crank shows no major signs of oil starvation, which is nice. I don't know what the value of the crank is, but it's nice to have some sellable parts. Else interesting to point out is that this engine, the center line of the crank journal is not centered with the cylinder bore. I told you guys I would do a size comparison between the rods and pistons and another rod and piston. Well, this is the L15 rod and piston here, and this is a K20 out of a Civic Si. And this thing looks massive compared to the L series, but again, it is half a liter larger in displacement. Wait, that's it? I'm done? That teardown is over? And look how clean I am. I think my sense of normal has been skewed from working on all these terrible European engines. But a 1.5 liter four-cylinder that has half of the bolts missing already, well, it doesn't get any easier than that. And the reason that core looked like that and it was in that kind of state is because it came from a dealership. Dealership cores and repair shop cores, they typically all look like that. And the reason for that is when a tech condemns an engine, that tech is not paid to reassemble that engine properly. They kind of just slap it back together, stick it in the corner or in the scrap bin outside, and then I get my hands on it. And that's what happened with this engine. A local Honda dealership got this engine. I saw it while I was there and I said, hey, I want that. And then now you have a video. I think what happened to this engine is kind of atypical. I don't know whether a drain plug was left loose, an oil filter was left loose, or maybe someone changed the oil and didn't put any oil in. But the back of that head was completely trashed. And the reason for that is it is the furthest point away from the oil pump. So it probably ran until that cam seized. It might have jumped time, but I didn't see any bent valves. Either way, the top of that engine was trashed and the bottom end looked pretty good. However, I really can't sell a bottom end that has had that kind of metal run through it without blasting the whole thing apart and selling it in pieces. I wouldn't feel good about it. I don't really know the value of these parts either. I can't tell you if the crank's good, if the block's good, or what I'm going to sell these parts for. This is the very first one I've had through the shop. I also don't know if these engines are problematic or not. I've heard stories from my tech friends that have said, oh, they break valve springs and they have an oil dilution issue on CRVs with when they're short tripped. But these are not my own data points, so I can't tell you to stay away from them or go out and buy these vehicles with this engine. All I know is I hope I can sell these engines in the future. If you'd like to buy parts from this engine or any of the other engines I've torn down, I'm going to leave our email in the video description. And like always, I love all the comments, the suggestions, and even the criticism. I love all of it, and I'll catch you on the next one.